This is Jade Garza with the University of New Orleans Oral History course, 3992. Today is November 27th, 2022, and I am seated with Elena R. So, wonderful, lovely Elena. Where were you born?
I was born in Covington, Louisiana, at Lakeview Hospital.
Okay. Have you lived in Louisiana your whole life?
Good question. So, I was born in Louisiana, as I just said, and then from there on, I moved to Hammond. From Hammond, I moved to Metairie, and then from Metairie, moved to Mandeville. And then I went to Egypt for a little bit when I was younger, for about a year and 2 separate trips. And then I came back, and then resided in Mandeville again for a little while, and then in Madisonville. And now I'm here.
Wow. Okay, so you've kind of been a little bit over the
Louisiana and Egypt. Yep.
Can you tell me about the Egypt trips?
So that was really great. I went when I was a kid, so I didn't understand too much. But I remember I enjoyed the plane ride when I went, and then going was crazy. I had this like idea of Egypt that it was gonna be just Mocha. Hey. That it was gonna be I don't know why I thought this. I was a weird kid. I was picturing it as just like a cartoon, like in my head.
Mm-hmm.
It was all animated in my head. Not that I thought it was gonna be that way, but I legitimately had no clue what it was going to be like, because the only reference I had was like ancient Egypt, pyramids. So I was like, oh, so it's going to be a desert with buildings. That's what I thought. So,
how old were you when you went?
I went first when I was 5, came back when I think I was 6, then went again at 7, and came back at 8. So it was between 5 and 6 and 7 and 8.
Alright.
And I went to school there for a while, which really, that was the reason I got held back. And but I did pick up the language, so now I'm bilingual, which is really cool. And when I went to school there, it was very difficult because I spoke English only, and so they're trying to speak to me in Arabic. And every place I've been to in which, as a kid, in which someone trying to teach me either like about the Islamic religion, like Sunday school, for example, or if I was in those classes, those teachers would always get frustrated that I didn't know what was going on. And I remember my mother told me, she walked in on one of the classes, because she'd work at these schools, because she's an American citizen and had an American education, so they're like, oh yeah, come work for us, please. Didn't really require much. And so she'd come in and she'd talk to my teachers and whatnot, and they noticed that I would memorize what the other students were saying or what their answers were, or I'd memorize the answer or something like that, and then I'd just regurgitate it, I'd repeat it in Arabic. Not that I knew Arabic or understood it, I just, started learning how to do that. And they're pretty nice. Honestly, the people in Egypt that teach, especially when it comes to religion, way nicer than the ones here, ironically enough. But most of the teachers I had here were Pakistani, and that's a whole thing in itself. So I was in Egypt, a lot of cool family members, a lot of people I didn't really know, but of course, every time I was over there, they're like, say something in English. It's like the same way over here, but vice versa. And I was very shy because I didn't know what I was doing. I was in a new place, new country, new people. But now I miss it. I want to go back, and I know it's not going to most likely be as good as it was when I was a kid, because everything as a kid is so wondrous and new and whatnot, and it's almost romanticized a little bit. Especially over time, things get more nostalgic, and I will be very disappointed when I go back, or I'll probably enjoy myself. So, yeah.
So why did you go to Egypt? Like, what was...
Weird reasons, honestly. My grandmother, and that's a whole story in itself as well, my grandmother had made my mom go because each trip was for a different reason. One trip was for a wedding, and in which we just ended up staying there longer than needed, and then the other trip was because we have a lot of properties over there, a lot of flats. They're all in my grandmother's name. And even to this day, it's still difficult to get her to go over there and sell them. She has to sell them because she needs the money, and also they're just sitting there collecting dust. And they've been definitely robbed a couple of times because, again, they just sit there and no one takes care of them, and people go in, which upsets me so much because my grandfather, who passed away way before I was born, a lot of his stuff is in there, and I never got to know him, and it sucks that most of that stuff is either probably stolen or damaged, and I'll never get to see it again. I remember he had two things I remember in one of the flats I stayed at. It was a model boat, very intricate, very cool, sitting on the mantelpiece. And the other thing was a textbook with like archaeological stuff in it. And I would just sit there and look at the pictures because I didn't know how to read at the time. And I did that a lot, where I just look at books and look at the pictures, because my mother bought me a lot of like anthropology and archaeology books and stuff like that, especially about ancient Egypt and stuff like that. So I've said stuff like that a lot. So I miss those places, because, and also the people that were there. So we lived in a very poor area. It was better when my grandmother had bought it, like I think maybe the 70s, somewhere between the 70s and maybe the 80s. It obviously was a much better place, but over time, that area in general is just very, it's poor. So the people I hung out with, the people that I knew in Egypt, the places I stayed were, and I didn't find this out till later, were places that were predominantly poor. And I mean, it makes sense given that like we'd go to markets and stuff like that, and you'd see homeless people on the street, or especially there's a lot of local markets and stuff like that from people all the way from the farmland. And it made sense, but obviously I didn't connect the dots as a kid. And it's very interesting and contradicting, because my grandmother has always been, still is, it's kind of delusional, been someone who likes to think almost as if she's rich, almost as if she's like royalty. Because in Egypt, name has a lot of weight, and your family has a lot of weight, where you come from has a lot of weight, and if you come from a good family, it's something that you can use, something you can be like, oh, well, yeah, I'm a Zaltar, I'm from this family, the same family that had this, that, and the other. I know my family was related to some politicians from Egypt. And so it's something you can, use, especially when she started marrying, when she married the American man who's my grandfather. Now she could say, oh, I'm American, because I've got an American passport now. And so she'd use that all the time. So it's funny that and even in Egypt, I don't know if at some point she, helped the poor and did things for her community because out of the goodness of her heart. But what I ended up seeing later on, and based on the things I've heard of, she's always done good stuff to either expecting something in return, or just to say, oh, look at me, I did this for that person, I did this for that person. And she's very narcissistic and vain. And so she still hasn't sold the flats. And everyone over there thinks of her as such a high regarded person, like, oh, that's what's her name? She did that for this person, and she's a saint and whatever, which sucks because she's living here now, and she has her own place in it's not a retirement home. It's kind of like a retirement home, but the people there it's not a nursing home, it's a retirement home. So people go there, they live, they take care of themselves, kind of like their little apartment. And she cannot take care of herself. She's doing a terrible job, and she's a hoarder. Her place ends up a mess. Like, it gets gross. And every time we go to help her clean, when we leave, it's always, oh, you stole something. Oh, this, that, and you did this, you did that. And then she'll call people in Egypt and be like, oh, they're so horrible, they're doing this to me. Even if we're doing all this stuff for her and trying to help her and make sure she has a place to live. And so then the people over in Egypt call my mother, and they're like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that to her? Why are you doing this to her? They don't see the full picture. Even when we try to explain the full picture, it's like, well, she's your mother, which that's a whole cultural thing, don't even start on, that I even deal with. Of, no matter how bad the parent is, no matter how much, like, it has to be real bad for people to, like, it would take my mom being a murderer for people to be like, oh, yeah, you're right. She's got a problem. But for the most part, almost everything is, oh, well, she's your mom. Oh, she cares about you. Blah, blah, blah. And not to say I don't love my mother, or, like I said, it's a complicated relationship, but nonetheless, it's something that annoyed the hell out of me. So that's a whole thing, and she's let all her stuff there, crumble. Her legacy is, dust to dust, ash to ashes. And she doesn't really realize that, and in her head she still thinks she's, to be highly regarded, when it's like, you have not done anything to show that you're worth admiring or highly, no matter what you did in the past, because that's another thing. in Egypt, in that culture, in that Arab culture in general, there is an idea of when someone gets old, you take care of them. You do everything for them. You wait on them hand and foot. But at the same time, that courtesy is not to be taken advantage of. Like, you're not supposed to just do this for me, do that for me, blah, 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 and then abuse that person or verbally abuse that person. It's not how it's supposed to work. But because of that cultural principle, my grandmother, takes it to the ab absurdum, where she's just like, you should be doing this for me. You should be doing that because I did all this in my past. I did this for you as a mom. I did this for you, blah, blah, blah. Which bothers me so much because you shouldn't use your past accomplishments and achievement as an excuse to just give up and stop trying or stop being nice to people. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. Wow, I've gone quite a tangent. So
it's all good.
I told you I'd give you some juicy stuff. So that's that. And the whole culture thing is difficult to deal with, but it's definitely there's such a very strong pattern in the lineage that I've observed. And I mean, as far as my family goes, the ones I've been around the most are my aunt, my mother, and my grandmother. And so I've had time to observe the way that, we all kind of work together and what kind of behaviors have been passed down and what kind of things inhibit ourselves to not either do the best or what have you. And there's a lot of things in there that, a lot of behaviors that are very self-evident and obvious, but because my family is so, either they're too busy to think about it, or they're too stuck in their own head, stuck in their own ways to actually care about self-evaluating themselves, they just don't do anything about it. And then, that behaviors and those cycles and those patterns just keep repeating. My mom's getting better at it though, but it's, yeah, okay. So what's up? What's next?
So you mentioned earlier, you read a lot of, looked at a lot of pictures in anthropology books and
archaeology books.
Yes,
go with that.
yes.
We'll go with that.
And I know that it's kind of translated a little bit in recent years. Is that where it kind of stemmed?
That's a whole thing in its own. Besides that, there was also my mother. When we went to Egypt, she was worried about my grades declining because of the fact that Egyptian schools really don't par up to American schools, even though depending how much money you have. Even though our schools are pretty bad, definitely pretty bad. The public schools in Egypt, if not non-existent, just not great whatsoever. You really have to have money to get a good education over there. And so she's worried about that. So what she would do is put me on things like, I think it was called starfall.com. It was this little reading thing. I mean, if you look at it now, it's crazy how bad the interface is and the software is. I went back to look at it to see what was up, and I remember as a kid it looked so new and polished, and I go back and I'm like, oh my god.
Oh yeah.
This looks like AOL.
Looking at websites from 2005.
Right, not a fun time. So, websites like that and stuff, she'd have constant reading. And when we were in the States, she would take me to libraries all the time, and we'd go to because my mom didn't have a lot of money. So she'd find new ways to do inexpensive things, to keep my childhood alive. And so we'd go to bookstores. We'd go to Barnes & Noble. We'd sit in the kids section because, it's very fun, and we'd read books. We'd go to the library in the kids section and read stuff. And she'd enter me into little contests, reading contests, where it's if you finish this amount of books, you get this. I remember one time I won a really cheap handheld radio and really cheap headphones, kind to get on flights. And the radio signal was just not existent. I don't even think it worked, but I was so excited about it, and then it was, a piece of junk. Mm-hmm. So it definitely started there. And I've had a rocky adolescence. And so there were many times where I wouldn't have my phone, or my parents would decide to just cut me off of everything, and then my only thing would be to read. And I've read a lot. And then as soon as I got to high school, I really, really, really picked up on reading and started enjoying it. And especially because at school you're not supposed to have your phone out most of the time, so I kind of would use that to read. And I'd read all the time, and now I don't have much time anymore. But it really definitely expanded my vocabulary and the scope of things that I know. I was just at my my boyfriend's family's house, and they were especially the mom, she's you know so much, that's crazy, you're only 20. And I'm like, well, yeah, the internet. And besides that, books, and sometimes I surprise myself with the words that I just kind of pull out my head and use so blasé in conversation. I feel like I did not use that right, and I feel like that makes me ignorant. Anyway, or arrogant. But it is true that, you know, the more you read, the more your vocabulary expands. And the reason I know that it's definitely the reading is because my mother, she used to read a bit when she was younger, because, you know, you have to in school and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But she had me at a young age, so she stopped. And when she was, like, really young, like, you know, in her teens, she didn't have time to read because it was, like, work, school, and then doing whatever my grandmother asked her to do. And her vocabulary is not as large as mine. In fact, she's the one who's always like, you know, how do you spell that word, or what does that word mean? Like, every conversation, at least one time, she's going to ask me what a certain word means. And it's something that, you know, most college students and most people my age, or most people at my level would understand, mm-hmm. But this 40-year-old woman, which is a whole other thing, it's the fact that, like, I'm going to sound really ignorant. I know I'm someone who's mature and very capable and responsible. And I definitely think, and most have agreed, that I'm definitely more mature than the average 20-year-old. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely not someone who's like the other people my age. And it was a big thing growing up that and I've always been mature. I grew up a single child, so I was around adults a lot. So that did lead to me just being less immature. And yet my mom would always love to say, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. You can't say anything because I have more experience than you, and you're not going to tell me what to do, and this, that, and the other. And it definitely came from a place of insecurity, of, you know, because people had talked down to her all her life. And so, pretty sure it's subconsciously. I don't think she ever said those things, like, you know, consciously trying to hurt me. But she'd always be like, you know, you don't know what you're doing, and very much on the defensive. Even if I wasn't demanding her to do something, or even asking, you know, for her to do something, or trying to boss her around, she'd still be like, you're not going to tell me what to do, blah, 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 blah. And it gets really irritating, because time and time again, I keep showing I'm a responsible, mature adult, mm-hmm. and then time and time again, I'm viewed as someone who's too young or too childish to know what they're talking about. And it's absolutely ridiculous given the things I've accomplished. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So you've kind of touched a little bit on it, but your parents, what's your relationship with your parents like?
So, my real father, out of the picture, so my grandmother had, to some degree, arranged a marriage between my mom and this guy, who's Egyptian, 100% Egyptian, and they didn't know him that well. They met his family a bit, but honestly the wedding was a bit rushed, and because that's how things are done in that culture is, you know, you meet someone, you have them meet your parents, and within a couple of months, you know, dating, I wouldn't call it dating, you know, you check everything out, and the parents are like, yeah, you're nay, and then you go through with it, you get married. I think that's a horrendous way to do that, for the reason that you can't get to know someone well in a couple of months. And odds are the marriage either usually fails in ending in divorce, or, you know, both people are miserable. And then they stay miserable and try to make excuses on, you know, we'll make it work, we'll find a way. But the success rate of getting married a couple of months and then starting all those life commitments is not high. And I bet if someone looked at all the marriages that started that way, and if they went to Egypt and a lot of those Arab countries and observed those things, they'd see a lot of those people are not happy, at least 100%, no matter what they say. A lot of them are not happy, but because of that culture, it's like a self-feeding system, and you constantly are just like, well, because for hundreds of years, everyone has said this is the way you do things, and it's got to be done that way, so I'm going to do it that way because I don't want to upset my parents, or because I don't want to go to hell, or this, that, and the other, and they force themselves to do these things that sometimes are very illogical, and just because in the name of tradition, and it bothers the hell out of me. My mother still thinks that way, but it doesn't sit right with me. So anyway, back to my mother and my father. And then he turned out to be very physically abusive and emotionally abusive, and he was also very radical Muslim, one of those guys. And my mother, obviously, after seeing all those things and noticing all those things, divorced him, kicked him out, and I wasn't born yet, and so she then had to live with my grandmother, which, even worse situation. And then my grandmother and my mother and my aunt's relationship is very interesting because, you know, my aunt got to get away from all that and really turned a lot towards like American culture, probably as a coping mechanism to kind of deal with her mom, because my grandmother was definitely had, you know, shown signs of abuse, you know, and not necessarily physical, but definitely emotional. And so,
I apologize.
no, you're fine. So my mother kicked him out, and apparently I found out later that he wrote letters to her, you know, asking to stay in contact, you know me, which I don't really care for him at all, and it doesn't really bother me that he's not in my life. But then he, you know, went away, did whatever. He actually married 4 other women after that, or sorry, 3 other women, and had kids with, I think, the last wife, and then each of those marriages, you know, obviously, given that he's married so many women, he actually had to get divorced, you know, the first, you know, the middle times. And the last one was going to divorce him on grounds for, like, of abuse. And my mom had to testify or something like that, but they didn't go through with it for some reason, and they're still together, I don't know. But, and then when I was 13, he tried to get in contact with me, or I was such a troubled child, my parents decided, oh, maybe this is the answer. And it's so funny, because it was around Halloween, and I was, like, trying my best to give it a shot, because my parents were like, please, just do it, whatever, so I was like, fine. So, you know, I had showed him my art, he was like, oh, this is great, whatever. I was telling him about, you know, what's coming up and stuff like that, and obviously Halloween was around the corner. I was talking about my costume and how I was going to go do that, and he was like, you're not doing that, because that's the devil's holiday. And I'm like, okay, sir, so 2 things. Number 1, you haven't been here, so what makes you think you have the right to tell me what I can and cannot do? And then second of all, I tried to explain to him how it's not a devil's holiday. Like, first it began with paganism, then the Catholic Church, you know, messed with the holiday, and now it's just candy. Like, I don't, you can't convince me that I'm a Satanist for going out and, you know, like, it doesn't make sense. So, and then I told him, I was like, are you going to buy me candy? Are you going to? And he's like, oh, I'm sure your parents can. I'm like, no, are you going to do it? No? Okay. Okay. So I stopped talking to him after that, never got in touch with him again. And I feel bad for his daughters. He was insane. Like, he wanted to make me get a female circumcision before I was born. And that, obviously, another red flag. My mom was like, no, no, which is sad that now those are illegal. I mean, legal in some states. And so, he got out of my life, and later on, my mother, so it was just me and my mom for a while, which wasn't too bad. My grandmother sucked. You know, she really put a damper on that, and also my mom wasn't home a lot. She was working, you know, all the time, because you gotta make money somehow. And she couldn't finish college because of me. So yeah, so that happened, but you know, she still managed to make it a fun childhood. And then she married my stepdad in, I don't remember what year, I think around 2010, 2011, because their marriage is going on 11 or 12 years now. And so they're cousins. It's gonna sound crazy, first cousins, but in that culture, it was normal at some point, especially around like it's not as normal currently, but it was during the time they got married. People, they're starting to like shy away from that now, and I understand why my mom did it, because she, I guess, wanted to provide a father for me, but at the same time did not want to, because besides my real father, she's definitely had run-ins with really terrible, shitty men, and I'm sure she was doing it out of a place of fear. She didn't want to marry someone that she didn't know or get involved with someone she didn't know. And her cousin, who she was really close with, who proposed to her when she was 18, she had to refuse at the time for one reason or another, was a safe bet, safe option. So, and I love his parents. His parents are sweethearts. But my relationship with my stepdad's another story. Because it's been a complicated run with him. And to be fair, when he was in my life, I was about 7 or 8, and he had no experience with kids. Like, he was 30-something with no experience whatsoever. And nor did he have experience with kids. He also comes from a background of, like, he wasn't doing household chores. It's very traditional background he comes from, where it's just, the man doesn't have to clean, the man doesn't have to cook, man just has to go to work, and then he can enjoy himself however he please. My mom definitely changed him. It's been a couple of years, and she's definitely change the way he works and the way he functions. So they're not in that type of relationship. But he also is very hard-headed and brought a lot of views to the table that were just not, it was a struggle, you know, especially coming from two different cultural backgrounds. And, you know, I was under the impression that he did try his best, and you can't ask that much of him. But there were a lot of moments where, especially because my mom is just, she's tired in general, just of life and just all of it, so sometimes she just couldn't afford to put the effort into either defend me or argue with him for something or another. We'd always get in squabbles, but he would do some out-of-pocket stuff, and I would complain about it constantly, and my mother would always be like, just who he is, you know, he helps us financially, he's a good enough dad, he doesn't abuse you, whatever. And she would always make excuses for him, which I hated, because you make excuses for somebody, and that gives them the impression that, oh, it's fine, I can do these behaviors over and over again because it's normal, and I can't help it, apparently. And that bothered me a lot, but, you know, at some point I just gave up. And the way that I live and my ideals are definitely contradictory to theirs. And so for a long time, I just kind of had to be their ideal daughter, just to kind of get by and survive. And as soon as I left for college, big shocker to them, that I was nothing as I was when I was living with them, to the point where they're like, oh, I miss the old Elena, I miss, you know, my daughter, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, girly.
I miss the old Elena.
Right, I'm gonna read this to you. It's been me the whole time. The whole time.
I miss the old Kanye.
Jesus. Because there was a time in my life where I kind of was like really rebellious, you know, classic teenager story. A lot of mental illness going on. Still is there, but it was way worse, especially, you know, because hormones are rising. And I'm bisexual, and at the time my cousin had come out for me, or no, she threw me out the closet.
Outed you.
Yeah, outed you. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. And it caused a whole thing. Like, they're like, we're going to take away all your stuff until this phase is over, and you can't have anyone over, because apparently now girls are like boys, so we can't have that happening. Side note, my parents sheltered me a lot. Like, they did not want me near men, which, I mean, I'm a very hypersexual person, so I think they went, you know, the reverse with that one. Uno reverse on them. So, what was I going to say? Okay, so all that happened, and it caused a lot of strife to be me around them, so I just realized at some point I need to pretend to be a different person in order to just get by, in order to deal with this, because no matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter what I tell them, they just want, and they're very stubborn. They will only believe what they believe. And in fact, to get them to come to terms with the fact that I'm dating a man and I'm having sex out of wedlock was a whole story and a half. And for so long, I mean, my mother said some horrendous things, like, you know, she just called me a bitch, she called me a prostitute, a whore, wish she aborted me, and it was a whole thing, and she just wouldn't listen to whatever I had to say. Now things are better, obviously, and then at some point, she brought up my stepdad and said he never loved me. And when I came back to that, and in a later conversation, I asked her, like, what do you mean, how do you not understand I'm hurt? Like, do you not remember when you said this, that, and the other? And I brought that point up. And she doubled down on it and said, you know, he can't love you like he would his own daughter, because just they're incapable, like, you know, people are incapable of that when, you know, basically implying that when you have your own child, like your biological child, you have the capacity to love them. But when you do not, the capacity to love them is not and never will be there to a deep extent, like basically unconditional love. Not that she really had any, but he's never going to be able to show me unconditional love, is her point. And it really shocked me, because for the longest time she was the same person that would be like, he loves you like he's your own, you know, own daughter, he treats you as such, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, okay, so you wanted to tell me my whole life I was crazy because he cared for me and I'm pitching a fit, and now you want to tell me he doesn't. So my relationship with him is very rocky, which is sad, because before all that occurred, right when I was leading up to leave for college, that kind of thing, we had a lot of fun moments. Like, he would always dye my hair, he would cut my hair for me, and that would be a really nice, like, bonding moment for us. And, you know, one time, we were, like, right when I was about to leave for college, we had gone on some trip. Oh, it was for Ida, so I was already in college. They hadn't known about all that stuff. And he asked me, he was like, do you think I've done a good job as a father? Like, do you think you feel like you've been adequately loved, that you're not missing any love or anything like that? And of course I told him yes, because I'm not about to get into a deep conversation in a beach. Like, I'm not about to do that. And also I know if I told him otherwise, he'd take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the type of person. And even though for the longest time he's always been like, you can tell me, don't worry about your mom, you can tell me if something's going on, I won't be mad at you, whatever. And for someone who constantly said that, I still never trusted to tell him the truth about things, because I don't. Like, he also would get into spurts of like rage or whatever when he found things out. And he'd claim, oh, I'm mad because you didn't tell me, because you lied to me. But if every time something comes out, you have a problem with it, or you criticize me or shame me, of course I'm going to get a habit of not telling you stuff. Of course I'm going to start lying. Of course I'm going to hide things from you. And when he found out about whatchamacallit, he didn't say that thing again. He didn't say, oh, I'm upset you didn't tell me or whatever. It was, oh, we can't talk to you anymore. You're not our daughter. We don't know you, blah, 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 because you've done this. You're a whore. You bring shame to the family name, whatever. And they completely cut me off after college. Or at least after they found out and everything and all that stuff happened. And, I take care of my own stuff, which was another thing. She kept harping on, you can't make those decisions for yourself because you're not old enough. But I was saying, if I'm old enough to take care of my bills, if I'm old enough to pay my rent, if I'm old enough to work, if I'm old enough to do all those things and keep myself afloat without your help, then I'm old enough to make my own decisions. Regardless of what those decisions may be, you should trust, based on the way that you raised me, that I can make those decisions with a sound mind and keep myself safe. And I've done thus so far. So yeah, my relationship with them is very complicated. My relationship with my aunt also not as toxic or anything like that, just kind of surface level.
Mm-hmm.
And it is what it is. She is the way she is. And I love my siblings. And I love my younger cousins. They're really adorable and sweet, and they love me. So yeah, next question.
The way you just lean into like everything perfectly.
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned earlier that you grew up as a single child.
Yeah.
And then now you've just mentioned that you have siblings.
Right. So
When did that happen?
I can't remember. Oh, so exactly at 13, I believe, because I'm 13 for my oldest sibling, 13 years apart. And before that, I didn't know what I was missing, because it was very lonely, obviously, and I didn't know, well, I probably would have still enjoyed to have, a sibling there, but at 13, to have really young siblings, like, you're coming too late, you know what I mean? Like, at this point, it's now, I didn't ask for this, I did not ask to be
too
a
late
mom.
in the game.
Right, and because my role then became, pseudo-mother, because my mom was still working full-time, and my stepdad was still working full-time. And my grandmother started helping a little bit at first, but I knew from the get-go she's not meant to take care of kids. Like, she cannot. She's a danger to kids. They didn't believe me, and I was there with her, so I was there to keep them safe and everything. Mm-hmm. And we'd get in squabbles all the time, because I'm like, you can't do that. You have to do it this way, and she wouldn't listen. And then eventually my parents realized you can't keep children, because, my grandmother said some horrendous things. And I don't even know if she's in her right mind or not, but regardless, she just shouldn't be around kids. And so then it became solely on me to, not solely, like, my aunt would help sometimes when she could, but for the most part, when my mom was at work and my dad was at work, it was me taking care of those kids. And if I wasn't at school, if I wasn't doing homework, that was my job. And my mother thought that, this is what you're supposed to do. You're a sister. People have it way worse than you. You shouldn't be complaining. You gotta be a team player. You're selfish. Every time I complained about it. And in her mind, it was like, I'm giving you enough time to do your homework. I'm giving you time to go to school. I'm not making you get a job like she had to do. Mm. And so in her head, it's like, well, you're getting, A1 treatment, so there's no reason for you to complain. But she didn't care or really understand or realize that my social life then severely lacked, because I couldn't go out with my friends, because my mother also didn't trust anyone, so she wouldn't let me go out. I couldn't just go have fun. I couldn't go to places. I couldn't have people over often, because either we had bed bugs and we were living like really crappily for a while. Like, when my first sister was born, we were living in a really shitty apartment in Mandeville. Weirdly enough, because Mandeville's such a rich place, so this place was like, just in the middle of it. It was just poor. Mm-hmm. and it had bed bugs for a very long time. The entire time we were there, bed bugs. And if you know anything about bed bugs, they do not go away. And it's really, honestly, traumatizing because you go to sleep at night and you know in the back of your head that bugs are crawling on you and biting you. And my siblings were kids, and they would wake up in the middle of the night with dots all over them, crying and screaming or whatever and itching things. And not just that, but we had to sleep with them knowing that they would, because they collect in a very gross, like, almost brown to black sludge, make nests in crevices, fabric crevices. So I was sleeping on a blow-up mattress for a very long time, about 4 years, and they're always going to be there. And so sometimes I'd have to check and make sure I clean it out every so often. And my mom would put cups under the bedstands for my siblings' bed to catch so they nest in the cup rather than the bed. And that worked for a bit, but it was disgusting to just see them pile up, And I'd go to school and I'd see a bed bug crawl on my leg and I'd pop it and just be blood. So and it was pretty difficult. And I'd still have people over, because I don't understand. Honestly, I don't get how they never brought the bed bugs back home with them. But that was a whole issue. One time I had a rat die in my wall. The apartment people did nothing about it, so I had to wait for it to decompose. That was a fun time. A lot of incense going on.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've had a dead rat in my wall before.
It's not a fun time.
No.
And so we also had bad mold problem, especially the bathroom, like on the ceiling. It was an upstairs downstairs thing for like the later parts, because we moved apartments, especially when the kids came, because you needed more space. So we moved to another apartment in the same complex with an upstairs and downstairs, and so because of the bathroom and just the ceiling being really shitty, water would leak and mold on top and create stains all over it. And bugs would get in all the time, besides because also it's Louisiana, besides rats, roaches. Once there was like this big gray furry spider, I don't know what kind of, but it's like honestly the size of the palm of my hand. It was nuts. And I saw that right before I was going to school and right about to get on the bus. I was like, yeah, I'm out. Mom, there's a spider on the wall. Bye. And I left. I booked it. And it's funny because during that time, a lot of mental illness stuff was happening, a lot of self-harm, that kind of thing, and a lot of really impulsive behavior. And even later on, after all that passed, my mother would still be like, man, you were up to some wild, crazy stuff back then. I don't know what got into you. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, are you not aware of all the things that were definitely catalyzing all of that? Like, let's be real. And it's funny because even though they didn't want me sleeping with people, I'd managed to have girls over for sleepovers, and things would get a little frisky. Things would get a little frisky, hot and heated.
Absolutely love that for you.
Yeah, and they'd never know. Because it's BS. You're not going to let me go up to my friends, you're not going to let me hang out. The closest I'd get to hanging out, and this was only convenient because we lived right next to Rouse's and a Starbucks and kind of a strip mall type deal. And so I'd be able to walk back there and stuff. And I had friends in the complex that were also kind of in the same boat, and we'd all just a little ragtag team of kids, and we'd hang out, we'd do this. One of the girls I was friends with, that's the first time I smoked, and it was a very interesting experience, and I'm really appreciative of that because given how sheltering my parents were, there weren't a lot of opportunities or instances for me to gain those experiences. And it was another funny thing how my mother would always be like, you don't have enough experience, you know that. It's like, well, I wonder why. Maybe it's because I don't go anywhere. Maybe it's because I don't do anything.
Maybe it's because I'm enclosed in these four walls.
Right. So, and I still managed to find ways to kind of gain knowledge and experience, as I told you, by reading and, being chronically online. But I wasn't chronically online in just the mean way. I'd actually go out of my way to, learn new things and, learn about interesting tidbits and whatnot. And especially with literature, the great thing about it is and I read a lot of fiction. Even when it's fiction, I read a lot of historical fiction and stuff like that, classic literature. So although the stories were not real, the stories were obviously, they were written to, say something. They were written to talk about the time in which they were written in and talk about people's lives and how they live and the emotions of people and the way people think, to some degree, is timeless. There's a lot of things about humans that are predictable and things that they repeat and do again and again. So reading literature is very advantageous for somebody who didn't get to go out and experience life or interact with people that much. And I like, being someone who is more of like a casual observer, doesn't really impart judgment on people. I mean, I judge people, but like it's not a judgment that I'm making consciously, because everyone judges people. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. I forgot the question, to be honest.
It was about your siblings.
Oh, right. Well, actually, more on that. It was very difficult at first to kind of get acclimated to them and care for them, but eventually over time, because I was not obviously a great parent or someone to take care of kids, because when I was like a teenager, I'm not meant to sit here and be teaching kids on how to or parenting kids. Never claim to be an expert. So there are definitely moments where I probably didn't do a good job. Mostly like my temper would get heated. I'd yell at them or be unfair, and it's bound to happen when there are 3 kids running circles around you. Constant loud noises, and you can't get a break from it. You have to be there because you have to make sure they're not going to do anything to hurt themselves. And later on, and honestly, me and my siblings both found more of a fondness for each other and love for each other when I left for college. Because the times I got to see them, I didn't have to be the one that was constantly parenting them or disciplining them or worried about things. It wasn't my job anymore. So I had the ability now to just, be their sister.
I think also, the time, like, when they were born, you were a teenager.
Right.
You have all these hormones, all these emotions going on. You already have quite a bit going on in your life at the time.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that, like, you were very, like, emotionally just, like, kind of everywhere.
Right. And I'm glad that I got to go to college by the time they started getting a bit more conscious as far as, like, aware of things, because they don't necessarily remember all the times when they were young. I'm sure they have memories of it, like, very faintly. And they definitely started to not like me for a good bit before I left for college, because I was always the one who was just like, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, don't do this, don't do that. And, of course, they hate the person that's telling them not to do things. And then eventually, because my sister Lily's an interesting case, though. She can do wrong, but in a sense she can't do no wrong. She's kind of like Mocha. A little less of a butt face. But she is remarkably empathetic for her age. Like, she really cares when people are hurt. And I've noticed the way the other kids interact, and I'd fake cry around them all the time to get them to come hug me, or I'd also real cry. I had breakdowns all the time. And they, to their credit, their kids, they wouldn't know what to do. They're just like, why are you crying? Be like, it's complicated. But Lily would be like, oh, I'm sorry, and like come up and hug you and try to make you feel better and whatnot. And it's remarkable for her age. I mean, she's 5, but even starting at like 4 and 3, she was doing all that stuff. Even at 2. And I developed a special relationship with her. Like, I love all my siblings, but there's just something about her that's very special. And created a lot of sentimental moments with her, especially when I put her to sleep. Because, it was a time where, out of all the rowdiness that happened all day, all the yelling I had to do, all the disciplining, this was a moment where all I have to do is be calm and create an environment for her to fall asleep, and she just falls asleep in my arms. And there's no more of her screaming, there's no more of her doing this, she's peacefully sleeping. And that, became a moment of like, oh, I love her so much, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So my next question, as somebody who also is a minority, grew up in an ethnic household, and I primarily see it a lot in Mexican culture, is that families will often have a lot of children, and it becomes the child's responsibility to take care of the next child.
Exactly.
Do you think, is that a fear that, like, your siblings will have to take care of each other?
No. They'd never have to do that because they're all near the same age. But if it was one of them had a bigger age gap than the other, for sure that happened. Now, that same thing is definitely in my culture, where people always have a lot of kids, because it's also, having kids is just something that in that culture is always like, oh, you gotta have kids. Everyone wants kids. Even now, I'm like, I don't think I want kids. I don't think I'll have kids. Oh, you're too young. You'll change your mind. I'm like, no, I'm not going to change my mind. You know, they just keep harping on that. And the reason my parents, had kids, because they always wanted kids, but they were like, especially my mother, my biological clock's going to run out. I got to have them now, or I'll never be able to have them. Which really is not true. She could have waited a bit longer. And maybe there would have been complications, but she could have definitely had a kid or two. And that's what's really annoying, is that she had them at such a time that was a dumb idea. Very stupid. As I told you, with the conditions of that apartment and the way we were living, you don't want to have 2 kids and put them in that. It's ridiculous. And my stepdad, he was trying to make a better, more stable financial situation for us by like being entrepreneurial and trying to start businesses and whatnot. I don't know the exact affairs of their money and what happened at that time, but we go look at houses or stuff like that, and he was very picky. He was like, no, I don't want this because this needs to be fixed, and I don't want to move into a house where I have to fix stuff. It has to be absolutely perfect. We're not moving to another apartment because I'm not going to bother to pay more rent for no reason when we're just going to move out. So you just have to suffer it a bit more, and that was for 4 years. Until eventually, finally, I was like, well, you know what, maybe it's time, When we moved out of there into not even like average living conditions, still subpar. I've lived in apartments for most of my life. Still not that great. It wasn't a house. It wasn't, a stable home or anything. But just to not even have bed bugs, like the amount of gratefulness I had, I was over the moon. And it's, again, another funny, double standard in which my mom would always be like, you can't make decisions, you don't know how to be responsible, this, that, and the other. When she, obviously, as shown, had made irresponsible decision after another. You don't have 3 kids when you can barely support yourself, and when you're barely trying to get off the ground, and when you have bed bugs, and when you leave your own daughter at home to take care of herself while you have to go work. Like, when you are put in a situation where you have to let your daughter stay at home by herself, why would you have more kids, And it was ridiculous, and things got way worse when she had kids because, hormones were rising. Mine were already pretty high. So, like, there were outlandish moments. Like, the cops were called one time, CPS was called one time. Don't even get me started on CPS, and don't even get me started on the cops. But it was, because it looked like, just an ungrateful little daughter and her pregnant mother who's trying her best, and blah, blah, blah. So whatever word I said, out the window. No one cared about.
You were a teenager at the time, too. You're just a rebellious teen.
Right, which that even flows into medical care. Like, in the counselor I used to see at a center that was religiously backed, I guess, it was like really cheap to get care there because it was half a charity, half, like, they'd ask you to pay something, but the way that these people were being paid was through something religious, I don't know. The people weren't necessarily highly religious themselves or anything, but I'd see this woman, and I would tell her, how I'm feeling, and I'd tell her I'm always feeling depressed. I don't, love the things I used to. It just feels like my life just doesn't have color anymore. It's just dull, and everything is just bland, And I'd tell her these things, and I'd tell her how I felt, and she'd be like, oh, it's just your period. It's just weird. I'm like, I'm feeling this way all the time, all days out of the month, like that. She's like, oh, well, sometimes symptoms can occur before and after your period. I'm like, so the entire month. So you're telling me I have period symptoms all the time then? And it was a woman, nonetheless, a woman who actually said, I took a women's study biology class in college. I know what I'm talking about, blah, blah, blah. A woman who wanted to blame my depression on my period. So that was a fun time, and it definitely led to a mistrust of, just medical care in general, because I was also seeing a pediatrician that I'd go to, and I would complain a lot about my knees and my joints, and I had some problems with my back, and specifically my knees. My knees still hurt me to this day. Oh, because, spoiler alert, I have arthritis. And he had me get tested, my rheumatoid factor get tested, and I had to go to a specialist for it. The results came in. He's like, oh, no, the results are fine. Nothing to be worried about. 4 years down the line, when I end up, seeing a regular physician at a regular hospital, she looks at those test results. She looks all the way back. She's like, what are these test results from 4 years ago? Something about your rheumatoid factor is very high. And I was like, what are we talking about? Who, why, what, when, where? And then they tested me again. I'm like, yeah, your rheumatoid factor's high. You have, rheumatoid arthritis. And I was like, okay, cool, nice, fun time. So I've been sitting on that for a while, and no one wanted to treat me. And that was something I constantly run into. Whatever pain I had, whatever pain I was experiencing, doctors would always say, oh, it's nothing, it's just, a sprain, it's just growing pains, it's just whatever, because they don't take you seriously. Either as a woman or as a teenager, they just don't take anything seriously. And obviously that's something I dealt with a lot in a lot of my life by a lot of people around me. People just wouldn't take me seriously, and it was infuriating. And, to finally find someone, especially like my boyfriend, who, way older than me, but nonetheless still sees me as his equal, still treats me as someone who is intelligent enough to talk to and take seriously and all that stuff. And it's just ridiculous. So yeah. Oh, sorry, back to ethnic stuff.
Yes.
As ethnicity, as a minority, it was a lot. And especially because you're living in a world that's neither one or the other, and you gotta compromise between the two. And lately, the one that's been giving me the most trouble is my, Egyptian side. And it is what it is, and there's a lot of flaws with it that no one really wants to talk about or recognize, and there's not really much I can do. But it's something that bothers me every day, especially because there's a lot of misogyny, and a lot of misogyny, what do they call it when women are misogynistic? I feel like there's a specific word for that. I guess not. But a lot of misogyny from men and women in my life. Mm-hmm. And it's always been like, oh, you gotta be modest, you know what I mean? Because men can't control themselves, and it's up to you to, take the burden and do this and do that. Like one time I went swimming with my cousins, and I wore this little Hannah Montana two-piece. And I remember my mom, thoroughly yelled at me. She was like, and I was 10, I think. She was like, you're wearing a bra and panties, essentially. Blah, blah, blah. Someone could come and snatch you and look at you, do this, or touch you, or whatever. And I was like, girl, I'm just trying to have fun. It's purely for the purposes of that. It's easier, it's easier for me to swim. It's more comfortable for me to swim when I wear something less restrictive. I'm not trying to go out as a 10-year-old and be sexy and alluring. That's not my goal.
Hannah Montana was not.
Right. And still, even before I was going through puberty, before I even, any of that was in my head, constantly drilled to me, oh, you need to start covering up. Oh, you can't wear that. You gotta wear a bra. You can't look like this because someone, and then in school, of course, as we know, you'll distract boys, whatever, which sucks even worse when you're very curvy naturally. There's nothing I can do to get rid of that. That's there. And it produces a problem. I could wear something any skinny white girl can wear, and I'll get in way more trouble than she will, obviously. And that the only way you could get rid of my curves is if I just wore a freaking trash bag. And I'm not about to wear a trash bag, and no one's going to make me do that. I'm not doing that. Which is a very big double standard in America, the fact that they'll still tell women what to wear, but at the same time, be like, oh, niqabs and, and burqas, they're unethical. Blah, blah. We shouldn't be telling women what to wear. But
I was going to ask, with being told to cover up, do you think that, part of it was from a religious backing?
I mean, essentially, obviously, and of course, but the thing with religion is it's male-dominated. It's all patriarchal, at least Islam is. And although a lot of Muslims will tell you, all Muslims will tell you, oh, it's the God, the book was written by God, His word precisely. And that's what they always use to justify whatever action or behavior they're talking about. And then you can't really argue with them if you're another Muslim, because the word of God, you can't trump that, It's God's word. And in my opinion, I'm not going to say whether or not it's true that is the word of God, because it's not my place to speak on that. I'm not going to judge other people's views, but it is fishy in my opinion. Mm-hmm. It's fishy because, regardless of whatever rights Islam offers to women, it's definitely outweighed by the rights and privileges it offers to men. And that religion definitely does benefit men a lot. And maybe not the religion per se, because to be fair, I haven't read all of it, but at least the religion based on a from a cultural standpoint, because all throughout the entirety of that culture, men dictate how women should live, whether that's live freely with as many rights as they like. It's always up to men, like, oh yeah, you can do that, that's fine. In fact, it is a thing where you can show your husband your hair if you want, and when you get married, most of the time you can decide not to wear your hijab if you'd like. It's up to you. But it's something you should also run by your husband. Kind of the same way here that, when a woman wants to get her tubes tied and she's in a marriage, you have to get the husband's consent as well. It's not necessarily outward misogyny. It's trying to be considerate of both people, I guess, but it's still like, it's my body. You shouldn't be telling me what to do with it. And that's not to say that all Muslims are misogynistic. I don't know every single person, and I don't want people to just assume Islam is a misogynistic religion, because we've already got enough of that out there. But based off of my experience, and based off of what I read, and based off of the things that even my own mother has told me, that she's like, you have to do it this way because God said so in the book, I find to be ridiculous. I find it to be ridiculous because, again, obviously benefits men. And I don't like it when Muslims constantly harp and parade around that, oh, the book was written by God and it's the word of God and blah, blah, blah. Because it's fine if you believe that. But the Muslims I've been around always like to use that as a reason for why they're better than other religions. And to an extent, they do have a point that other religions, their books are not foolproof. It's a known fact that the Bible, 30% is missing. Obviously, a lot of crap got messed up in translation. We get that. That's understandable. But no matter what, based off of the God that people like, picturing or idealizing, I don't think God, who wants people to be good people, would want you to sit there and make yourself better and be like, oh, my religion's the best because I've got all this going for me and yours doesn't. And even the Quran, there's a story in there about the Prophet, peace be upon him, being like, having an interaction with non-believers, as they put them. And the non-believers were like, oh, come visit our church, or why don't we go see your stuff? Let's blah, blah, blah. And the Prophet was like, no, I'm not going to go see your stuff, and I'm not going to force you to come see my stuff. And left it at that. Because Islam is supposed to be a religion based off of that surah, based off of that story, or parable, I guess, in the Quran. It is 100% that Islam is not supposed to be a religion in which you go out seeking to convert people. Now, history is a different story. Tons of Islamic empires have gone out and been like, oh, we're going to treat you like crap unless you convert. We'll give you all these benefits. That definitely has happened. But based off of that book and that surah right there, it's not supposed to be a religion where you push it on other people. Again, not to say that people still don't do that. But again, I don't like that, and I don't like just pretending that God affords me all these great things, compared to other religions or compared to other societies, when in reality, being a woman is very hard, and it comes with so many difficulties, not even based on anything that's written in the book, but the fact that we have a uterus and have to bear a child, and I'm not going to sit here and listen to people say, oh, it's because Eve effed up, I don't care. I don't care if Eve effed up. Why is that my business? I'm sorry, you did not have to put me and sack me with this just because some other lady made a mistake. That's not my business. And so, even based off of that alone, there's men have an upper hand, regardless of whatever the book says. God, if he is real, gave men an upper hand. And no matter how much, because even in the book, even the things that, the rules that are set for women, the rules that are set for men, obviously, as you can see through time, women have always, bear the fruits of it. Like, they've always been the people who have been oppressed, because there are rules in the Quran for men as far as modesty goes. Don't wear gold, don't show your skin as much, don't do that. Keep up your hygiene, that kind of thing. But obviously it pulls in comparison to having to tell women, cover up this, wear this. On a hot day, I don't care if you're hot, cover up. And alone having to give birth to a child where men just get to la-di-da-di-da. Let me impregnate a woman because I want a baby and I don't care after that, that says something. And although, men make up half of the child and they contribute as far as, making a child, their contribution pales in comparison to what women have to do in order to have a child. And I honestly, in my opinion, men shouldn't get much of a say at all in how a woman has a child, if she wants a child, whatever the hell, whatever has to do with her body. Because even if she wants to abort the child and the man still wants it, tough luck, kiddo. Because guess what? You could go, have sex with another woman and have a child that way. A woman is stuck with that child for the rest of her life. She's stuck with having to give birth. Push a whole ass watermelon-sized baby out of her vagine. Like, you can't. I'm sorry, I'm getting really heated.
No, the vagine is what got me.
I know, I'm naturally comedic. Anyway, yeah, so next question. Sorry, I go on for like hours for each question.
No, it's absolutely, it's perfectly
Is there
fine.
a time limit on this?
No, there isn't.
Okay, cool.
We're currently we just made an hour.
Giving you a lot of material.
Yes.
Hey, you want to write a book? Please?
I want you to, we have only gone through like a few questions, a few of my questions.
I told you. I told you.
So, have you ever felt close with your Egyptian identity, or did you ever try and like push it away?
Nah. Trying to push it away is a very odd term. I never tried to necessarily push it away and not get involved in it whatsoever, even at home. But when, for example, it was like, because at school, it wasn't, I never brought it up, but I never denied it.
Mm-hmm.
It was me just trying to fit in with all the other people there, and it was definitely, and this was like, 4th through 6th grade. It wasn't that long that I felt the need to, compulsively fit in.
Mm-hmm.
But it was it was such a struggle, because no matter what I do, no matter what I did, I'd never be like the skinny little white girls who always got the guy, and that's fine for what it is. And at this point in my life, I'm like, I wish I never felt that way, because I was trying to fit a mold that I never was going to fit. Because also being the size that I am, like, I'm a giant, I'm tall. Like, I was taller than a lot of my teachers for a very long time. And so you stick out, and it's not the traditional attractiveness that most, young boys grow up idealizing or thinking of. So it's not like I had a lot of suitors or callers, whatever you want to call it. And so while I would watch, all the boys flock after those other girls. And again, it is what it is. I'm better off for it, because why would I want someone who, in reality, is, wanting a different type of person entirely? And that's the only time I ever, not necessarily pushed my culture away, but kind of tried to, fit in somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I still feel like I never really fit in 100%, not even in my own culture, but I've always embraced, or for the most part, always embraced, the music, the food. I was the kind of person like, Mom, turn the music down. Like, not because, I was embarrassed of it or anything, but just because it was so loud. And also, growing up, I've always been, like, tried to be very cautious of where I speak Arabic, or at least when I was younger, because I always had a fear or thought that if someone caught me speaking Arabic, it might lead them to think that I'm, a radical Muslim or a terrorist or what have you. So it's not that I try to hide it, but like in public, I try not to speak it too loud or what have you. It'd be a thought in the back of my mind.
Can I, about like that? Was that like a thought, like an anxiety that you had pushed upon you, or is that an anxiety that like you had just like?
It's a weird double-edged sword. It's because a lot of my life, people, especially like when I was in school and I saw like school counselors and stuff for various other reasons, they'd always like at the end be like, is anyone harassing you? Is anyone blah 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 because you're Muslim or whatever? And fortunately, I've been fortunate enough to not have to deal with a lot of it, especially as bad as it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because I never brought up my religion in school, because I knew that it's liable to bring something up. I kind of said F it in my junior year, which it was fine. No one, harassed me or anything. But I've been around people who have been like, oh, terrorist this, terrorist that, or Muslims are blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of just sat there and listened. And they never knew that I was Muslim, so I didn't, get that heat. I've faced a lot of problems simply because I look different than most of the people I went to school with. Because I went to school in Mandeville, and a lot of those people are rich and white. And so I did face issues because of that, not necessarily because of my religion, but mostly because of just the way I look and the color of my skin.
Mm-hmm.
That was a whole thing I had to deal with. And those people would never outwardly say oh, you're brown, we don't like you. It was more of like, oh, they're going to notice me because I stick out like a sore thumb, and because they always automatically assumed I was a troublemaker, even though in high school especially, I had a pretty good track record, great grades, didn't get in trouble often, that kind of deal. And so it was just ridiculous. But it was a thing that, adults around me were trying to make sure wasn't happening. But because of the media I saw, because of the things I saw through the internet especially and specifically, of all the hate that Muslims receive and all that, I was obviously and definitely aware that existed. So it made me more cautious, because also a lot of the people that were in that community definitely have said racist things, not necessarily towards Muslims, but immigrants, black people, like the whole shebang.
Any minority,
right? Because it's white Americans, Baptist, Southern, like it's the whole package, and rich. So especially with the kids who didn't have a lot of exposure to other people and just only had their parents, kind of living in an echo chamber. So yeah, it's a project.
I mean, yeah, that definitely was something I wanted to kind of touch on and ask you, just because, you're Muslim, and you've also, you were not here when 9/11 happened.
Yeah,
you were not born yet, so you've only experienced, this post 9/11 sudden, massive hate towards anyone, really, who was not.
And the thing is, most of my school career, I've managed to kind of just stay in the back, in the shadows, and especially not a lot of students, if any at all, knew that I came from a Muslim family or that I was Muslim or whatsoever. So I think that also led to me not having to face a lot of that directly. And when 9/11 videos popped up, I was just like, what's up? Like, because I was a kid when they were still, showing those memoriam videos and stuff like that and doing videos about it. I was a kid, and all of us really didn't really know. But they were just like, oh, yeah, okay, and no one looked at me like, oh, like they do with, Holocaust, what do they call that, lessons in school or anything like that, or slavery lessons in school, because they didn't know I was Muslim. And it's really sad to some degree, because a lot of my education was, acquaintances here and there, like one or two close friends throughout the entire thing. But, it had its benefits and its advantages and disadvantages of just not being known. Like, there was a moment where I was in a forensics class in high school, and I think it was my senior or junior year, I can't remember, and the teacher legitimately did not mark my attendance. I was there. I said here. I was there. Did not mark my attendance. And then they were like, hey, what, were you missing anything? I'm like, no. And so I go back to that class. I'm like, hey, I was here. He's like, no, you weren't. I was here. Like, ask anyone in the class. They'll tell you I was here. And he, kind of buckled eventually. But I went unnoticed. Like, Elena's here? Like, that happened a bit. Because I was quiet for the most part, and I didn't feel that interacting with most of the people I went to school with, or at least not necessarily went to school with, but the people I was in classes with, was worth it. Because I didn't have much in common with them, and sometimes they'd piss me off because they were coming from a very privileged place. So yeah.
So okay, we kind of touched on that a little bit. But like, if you want to add anything about it, but being Muslim in the South.
It's, again, as I told you, I have definitely managed to just go undercover for most of it. My mom, splashed the fact that she was Egyptian and Muslim everywhere, and she really had a benefit of doing that because she, wasn't hijabi, she didn't wear hijab, and she was, she's white passing, very white passing. In fact, when she was in college and 9/11 happened, they were, like, these people were harassing a bunch of Mexican students thinking that they were Muslim, and my mom was just walking right on by. I mean, I don't know if she did anything to stop it or not, I can't remember, but the point is, no one thought 2 seconds about it. So she has had that privilege of being open and vocal, because she's white passing. I didn't necessarily get that advantage, and I didn't consciously decide to shut up about it or not say anything. I mean, I did, as far as just saying I'm Muslim goes. I was like, that's not a good idea. Shouldn't say that one. But just, yeah, I flew under the radar for a good bit.
that story oddly parallels, I don't think you even realize the fact that when you were working at your last job, and you'd have people come up to you assuming that you were Hispanic.
I'm telling you. and not just that job, but like many jobs, and many times before that, people would come up to me like, hey, it's Espanol. I was like, no, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
The parallel in which some racist white people thought Hispanics were...
And then she has a daughter that looks Hispanic. Like, it's crazy. And I really think it's because, like, you know, brown people... I could say any race, I could claim to be any race that's brown and get away with it, to be honest. I could tell you I'm Indian, and you'd probably be like, not you specifically. But,
no,
you know,
but like,
yeah. Right, they'd be like, okay.
You'd be like, yeah.
I'm Mexican. And they're like, oh, nice, you know, I don't really need to try too hard.
People just look and they're like, brown skin.
Brown, yeah.
You're some brown.
Right.
We'll find out later.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, it was whatever. You know, it's kind of cool. It's like, oh, you know, other Latinos think I'm Latino. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess I must be sexy. No, but
the stereotype.
That is a stereotype. But I mean, to be fair, a lot of South American and just Hispanic women in general are gorgeous. And that's, I don't know why that is, but besides Hispanic women in general, people think a lot of brown women are gorgeous. Like, any brown women you just put in front of someone, they're like, oh, damn. And I'm like, I'm really just sitting here, and you're eating it up, but okay.
Girl, you do know why that is?
Oh, yeah, conversation.
It's like, girl, historically, we're exotic.
It's not even just that. Right, it's that because white people come in, they're like, ooh.
A brown woman.
Right, but now it's spread so far as not just white people being like, ooh, exotic. Like, it's just anyone who, you know, especially country-wise, anyone who sees someone else from a different country immediately, they're like, oh, I mean, listen, Italian men, oh, damn, you know? Spanish men, damn, you know, Russian, oh. They can be hot. Like, objectively, all these different types of, you know, people, hot. Not to say about their culture or their behaviors or whatever, but anything that's not what you're from, you're going to find attractive. It's a weird phenomenon, but because I've never thought myself to be like model attractive, but I'm just kind of average, kind of, you know, moving along, getting there. But people love to just be like, oh my god, you're gorgeous. Like, I went, you know, again to my boyfriend's family's Thanksgiving, and the first thing his aunt said to me was like, oh, your skin is so beautiful, and I was like, thank you. And then every time I go into a conversation about my skin, you know, it makes other people jealous because a lot of people struggle with acne, and it's not something I've had other struggles. Let's not say I've had some skincare struggles, but obviously not acne. Like, my skin is very clear, and even Brad is like, okay, we get it. Like, we understand.
Brad, for clarification, being your boyfriend.
Right.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's interesting, but makes me wish I could speak Spanish, because like often when they were asking me if I spoke Spanish, they needed assistance, and it bothers me that I can't just be like, yeah, blah, 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 you know. One guy one time, a regular of mine at the old cafe I was working at, saw my necklace. It had my name written in Arabic, and he was like, oh, what is that? Chinese? And I was like, okay. I was like, no, it's Arabic. And he's like, oh, cool. I was like, he's a really nice man. Like, he never was mean. It obviously just ignorance.
Yes.
And it was never like in a mean way or anything. And he was an old man, but it's funny. So yeah, that's that.
So I kind of want to go. So it's.
Also, what are the limitations for this as far as, like, you know, talking about sex or, and I'm not going to sit here and be like, I'm blah, 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 but I just mean, like, even on a factual basis, or, you know what I'm saying?
You feel comfortable sharing what you're sharing.
Okay.
But also, again, this is going to be reviewed by my professor.
Right. And whatever I say, I understand except that, you know, whoever's seeing it, I'm fine with them seeing it, but I just need to know if, like, cursing, I keep accidentally cursing. Not telling us about that, but yeah, just wanted to make sure if there's something.
No. So, if it isn't already aware, you have ADHD.
Oh, big time. Big time. Yeah.
And you're also a woman. Most females who have ADHD go undiagnosed,
Yeah.
and like if they do get diagnosed, it's very later on in their life.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, at what point did you get diagnosed?
I was diagnosed, I believe, around 7th or 8th grade. I think it was 7th grade, because I was doing so poorly in math, like poorly. And before that, for the longest time, my mother's like, I don't want to medicate you. I'm not putting you on medication, blah, blah, blah. But then eventually, it actually took me getting hospitalized to get diagnosed and medicated for ADHD and depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it took self-harm to get there, which is another ridiculous thing about not being taken seriously. It took me to go to such far lengths for someone to finally listen to me. And I probably did those things because nobody was listening to me and no one would like take me seriously. And as soon as it which is not a good thing to teach kids. It's not a good thing, you know, that it takes me that far to get someone to listen to me. It shouldn't take that far, you know, but with the way public school and mental health care system is in America, that's usually, you know, if not the person's, if not dead, you know, it takes a suicide threat or it takes self-harm for people to start listening. As far as the ADHD goes, though, there was no doubt. Like, no doubt. I don't know why the people I was seeing, like my psychiatrist and my counselor, didn't do anything about it. They'd like to sit there and wait on it, because it was very obvious, especially obvious for the fact that my mother very obviously has it. And for the longest time, it just kind of gets passed off as a personality trait. Like, oh, your mother's very talkative and that can't focus. You know, it's just, that's the Roundtrees or that's the whatever. And so they, what was I saying? Yeah, so that's kind of how it was viewed for a long time. But as soon as I got medicated, my grades jumped. And I immediately started getting better in school. And obviously that was the issue. And for the longest time, too, the fact that, you know, a lot of people, especially when I was young, especially adults around me, are like, ADHD, it's not real, it's made up, you know, just to, you know, sell medications and blah, blah, blah.
Just focus.
Right. Now, obviously, we do have a problem with over-medicating sometimes, and our country is definitely obsessed, or the pharmaceutical company definitely is out of control. And I would not doubt for a second that they overhype or like over-sensationalize things to sell more medication. But obviously in my case, I legitimately had ADHD. It wasn't just some annoying kid being a kid, you know, and they have ADHD. It was like I legitimately had ADHD. And it really made me doubt myself, even though I so clearly do have ADHD. I'm constantly like, well, am I just dumb? Like, or am I lazy? Is that why I have this problem? And, you know, ADHD really isn't real. And it really sucks because it definitely would lower your self-esteem. It would lower anyone's self-esteem. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
So kind of going off of that, I'm trying to read my notes from afar. I apologize.
Oh, you're good.
Also, you know, being back to more ethnic households and, you know, me having a bit of an understanding.
Yeah.
They often can have a lot of expectations from you.
Yeah.
And from their children. And did you or do you still feel pressure from your family to behave a certain way, act a certain way?
Absolutely. I don't know. I call myself Muslim in the lightest way of saying, because I mean I don't really follow a lot of the rules. And I don't ever want to say I don't believe in God because I'm not 100% sure, and I think it's very possible he could or could not exist. And I know if I ever told my mother, oh, I'm not Muslim, or I'm not too sure about it, she would kill me. It would kill her. And I see no need in going that far when I can still live my life as who I am and just, you know, tell her I'm Muslim. Because I can, you know, I never do anything in the religion that I'm not comfortable with. And I can still say that I believe in God and his prophet, peace be upon him, and I'm like cool with that. So I don't really see a need to break any of that to her, get into a discussion with her about it. And then also on top of that, college, definitely something I feel pressured to do. I mean, to to be fair, at this point in time and in this climate, it's almost necessary to have a degree to kind of get along in life. But I know if I were to decide college isn't for me and try to do something else, it wouldn't be a fun time. And that's another thing now, that I live in fear constantly that my mother will excommunicate me and not let me see my siblings at any slight, or large disagreement we have. So that's one thing. And then growing up, there was a lot of traditional female expectations placed on me of like, you got to be the one to clean, you have to do this. And for my stepdad, it was, oh, he's tired from work, he comes home tired, he shouldn't have to clean, he shouldn't have to pick up this. And now my mom is only getting better about that now after I've left. But it was on me, as my mother and my father are at work, it was on me to take care of the kids, it was on me to clean all their messes. And they ended up getting a larger house, and it's way too much for one person. Especially when you're stuck at home all day, you can't go anywhere. It's not like you have a car.
Yeah.
And they kind of be like, why are you so depressed? Why are you not doing anything? Why are you being lazy? Why are you being selfish? I'm like, well, I'm stuck in here having to do 6 people's cleaning, and whatnot and all that. And my mom would cook dinner sometimes, and sometimes they'd be like, well, you should cook dinner and whatnot, which I didn't mind. But again, it's like, you're putting all these things on me to do, and then saying when I can't or don't want to or can't even muster up the motivation to do it. Why? Are you serious? Like, it's right in front of you. This is too much for one person. But again, because they both come from a place of, well, I've seen people go through worse, or I've seen, sisters hold the whole house all by themselves. Because they come from that, it's like, well, you should be doing that. But the thing is, I don't come from a home where that principle is pushed. Like, when I was younger, it was, my mom was working and I was at home. TV raised me, school raised me. I didn't grow up with those values being that important to me. And it's made me a good homemaker, but what am I going to do with that? I can make a great wife, that's great, but that does not pay the bills. And it's just, it's a mess. So yeah, and the unequal, or what's the word when something is contradictory? The contradictory thing of it all that bothers me is how, especially when I was hyper fixated on and put under a microscope for everything. Like, if I wanted to go hang out with friends, if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to do that. But I know for a fact, if I was their son, I'd be like, oh, go have fun. Yeah, boys have to be boys and live their life and go have fun with their friends and do this. And I know absolutely for a fact, if I was a boy, I would not be staying home taking care of the kids. That would not have been my job. My mom would have been like, oh, I guess I'm staying home now. I would get to go out and have fun with my friends. And that's a problem in a lot of Arab households, and a lot of boys are treated that way in their households, especially American ones. And it's really a problem, because now you're raising a generation of men that think they are entitled to just sit on their asses all day doing nothing, and while any other woman around should be doing all that for them. It's ridiculous. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
You kind of touched on it again. The way you just magically just touch on like my next conversations was that, like, it definitely, family they'll hold something on the line for you to do a certain way. They're gonna hold something over your head. And you had mentioned with your mother cutting off contact.
Right.
Was that the only thing that was, like, kind of on the line that was like encouraging you?
There were multiple instances in which, before I went to college, where I tried to run away from home or leave or live with someone else or whatever, and I was foiled every time, because essentially I couldn't support myself. I didn't have a car. I couldn't just go crash at somebody's house, and they do all this stuff to make sure I didn't leave. I didn't have anything to my name. There's nothing I could do, and that's something they'd hold over my head is, especially like my phone. I was extremely attached to my phone, probably to an unhealthy extent, but to be fair, it was one of the only things, like, connecting me to other people, to the outside world. It was the only way I could see other things and do and have fun, There weren't many other options, so of course I'd be unhealthily attached to my phone. And when they'd take that away, they'd be like, we're taking this away, and I'd break down. I mean, honestly, I was doing a lot. And besides just that, they'd be like, well, if you do so-and-so, we're going to disown you. If you do so-and-so, we're going to cut you off. Or in more smaller instances, if I were to behave a certain way or do a certain thing, they just make my life hell by either taking something away or treating me a certain way. And it's something I constantly have to live with. And so when I finally was able to be on my own, which only thankfully to my grades was I able to muster that much money, and that's what's paying for my college now and what paid for my car. Even though I still do work, but obviously that's not enough. But because I got all this, the scholarships and the aid and whatnot, that, finally allowed me to get out from under them and be able to do my own thing. Because without, college, without me having to go to college and then needing all that money and getting extra, there was no way I'd been able to get my own car. Because if I had no car to begin with, there's no way to go to work. There's no way then to make money to buy a car, Because there's also a thing about, I couldn't do a lot of community service when I was in school. I couldn't go and get a job a lot. I only had one job in high school, regardless of me wanting to work more than that, because my parents only had one car. And they'd refuse to bring me anywhere or do anything because it's we have work and work comes first and this, that, and the other. Or I don't want you to get a job and have to work under somebody because you're a blah, 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 this family, and this family doesn't work under people. Or what was the other thing? Or it gonna interfere with your studies and whatnot. So, yeah, that was the whole thing. But yeah, they constantly would hold stuff. If not physical things, emotionally. Well, all the time they'd love to guilt trip me of you're selfish for not doing this, or essentially being you're selfish for being depressed, you're selfish for this, you're not a team player. Even if I would put in so much effort, or I do as much as I could possibly muster, it would still be, you don't do enough, you're lazy, you don't do this, you don't do that. Regardless of me realistically being quite a responsible person, especially when I'm not completely depressed, or in depressive episodes constantly. I do get stuff done and I can take care of myself, and I've proved that thus far. It's just not, I wasn't meant to take care of 6 other people or clean after 6 other people or take care of 3 kids, so yeah.
So,
it's like a free therapy session.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I worded my questions, was I wanted to kind of,
Get a little therapy moment.
Yeah, a little therapy.
Yeah.
Get, into the mental.
Yeah, no, because I'm definitely there. I'm feeling all the
Get
day.
into the mental. So family is a huge part of ethnic households, as we know.
Right.
With the relationships you have with your family, how does this affect you mentally?
Not in a great way, but I've always had a mental attitude of you just got to keep going. You got to keep pushing forward. No matter how utterly just crumbled I am, I keep pushing forward because I don't have a choice. Because I do want to survive and live. So in my head, it's if I stop and if I give up and I stop doing the things I need to do, you're done. Everything will crumble, everything will fall. And I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but that's just where I've come, and been. So despite all of the mental anguish my family causes me, I constantly just have to put it on the back burner and just save it for another time. Especially with a lot of the sexual assaults and the sexual trauma that I've faced in my life. Remarkably, I just shove it in the back and keep going. Thus far, I haven't had a breakdown yet because of such a thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I guess I'm doing good. I'm still going. And I'm also, even when I think about what happened in all scenarios as far as sexual assault goes or that trauma, I still don't break down. And I don't know why, and I don't know if there's anything I need to really assess, or I guess my brain is there's nothing we can else do about this. It kind of happened, and now we gotta do what we gotta do, kind of thing. And it's something I think about often. Is I'm very hypersexual, and sometimes I wonder if that's because of the sexual trauma I've had in my life. I could see it being linked subconsciously, even though I'm hypersexual just because that's me and that's who I enjoy being and that's just what I am. I'm sure probably it's definitely linked to daddy issues in some way. I don't know. It's definitely, there's definitely a link there. I don't know how we got there. We got there.
There have been studies done where
right.
sexual trauma can lead to hypersexuality.
Right, and that's what I've figured, and that's what I've heard about that. And so I guess. But as far as my family goes, they've definitely molded my head in a way, and sometimes with the ways I think, and especially, with Brad, I'll constantly be doing things or worrying about things that mostly apply to my parents, or displaying certain behaviors because of my parents, and then immediately being like, oh, I don't need to do that anymore, or, oh, I'm not in that anymore, so I don't need to think that way, which is so nice and refreshing. And I definitely had a lot of, they definitely impacted my mental health and, me as a person in general negatively, not in all aspects, but, for the most part, in a lot of ways. But I feel like I've kind of worked through that in my past, and then obviously recently, so with all the thing that I told you about my mom and the whole freak out and whatnot, and that's something I dealt with as it happened, and then afterwards I've just come to a conclusion of like, I'm attached to my mom, but I still in the back of my head am expecting her at any moment to just be like, oh, I don't like you, and now she's weirdly very nice, and it's really off-putting, and I still am always going to be prepared for her to, blow up and do all this stuff. So, I don't know how it's gotten me now. It's just, again, kind of something I just kind of leave to kind of float there and be what it is, just so I can keep, going. So.
Do you feel, and this is a little bit of a deeper question, of course, if you feel uncomfortable,
Open book, dog. Open book.
I know, but I still,
I know.
just to
I
remind
appreciate it, yeah.
Do you feel as though you have control over yourself, or that other people, family, possibly hold control over you?
I think at this moment in time, definitely in control of myself. I never feel like, besides college, but college, I'm not only doing it for my family. I'm really doing it because because I want a better future for myself. But as far as being bisexual and as far as my religion goes, that's the only thing in which I still hold my values, and obviously I'm bisexual, that's who I am, that's not going to change. And as far as my religious views go, again, not going to change. The only thing is I just don't bring it up with them. I don't talk to them about it. I don't bring those things up. Just because I'm trying to avoid, a whole fiasco all over again. And I definitely would say that they definitely controlled me, before college, because I just had to let them, because I had to keep going. I had to do as they wanted in order to, keep going. Now that's, again, they had control of me then, but as of now, because I'm financially independent, because there is nothing they can say, well, we do this for you, so you can, so you can't do this. Now that that's no longer a thing, I'm fine. I can do whatever I please, and I still feel like I will do whatever I want to do if I want to do it. And of course, my mom did hold my siblings over my head. She did hold that over, being like, if you change, you break up with him, it's change. And I just stuck it through, because I love Brad way too much to just be like, no, I'm going to break up with you, especially because we were so far into the relationship. It's insane to just be like, yeah, man, I'm going to dump you now. No, we're not doing that, especially with the relationship that me and Brad have. And it's not that I don't love my siblings or that I love Brad more than my siblings. It's just I'm not going to succumb to someone controlling my life and using my siblings to do that, because that's blackmail. And I'm not blackmail, but it's, it's I don't know what it's, extortion? No. I don't know, it's something, but, I'm not going to succumb to that. And she could definitely do that again, but I'm going to do the same thing I did before, just wait it out and stick it out, because, you don't make demands with someone who's emotionally unstable. That doesn't make sense. Like, why would you negotiate with somebody who's not mentally there? I mean, she's mentally there as a, as a functional everyday person, but emotionally, she overreacts and, you know, does too much. But yeah.
And then my last question for you, okay, is, do you feel as though you've made yourself happy? And
Yeah.
have you made your child self-happy?
Absolutely. Again, boyfriend. I mean, we know how old he is. Like, oh, come on. And sometimes I do like to be childish and fun. Never in like a, I'm gonna wear diapers now kind of way. You know, like, let me put a pacifier in my mouth. Just in a way of like indulging those childhood things I used to do, like, you know, toys or cartoons or what have you. Just indulging those things to kind of heal my child's self. Or my childhood self, and I definitely always strive, like, my main goal in life in general are two things: just to be happy and not hurt anyone. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm doing pretty well for myself. I definitely do things that make me happy within reason. I don't do anything that's like necessarily too dangerous. I mean, I've done dangerous things that were like dumb decisions, but in the current moment and for a good bit, you know, I've been pretty good about doing the things that make me happy, while still, you know, keeping an intelligent air about me, or a cool head. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting and talking to me and answering my questions.
Had a great time.
And just telling me everything.
Yeah. No, I spilled the beans.
You did.
I spilled all the beans.
Dr. Fitzmaurice?
Oh, you're gonna love this one. You're gonna eat this up. If you want, hit me up for a book. Because I got a hell of a story, and I got good stuff to say. Really great things that would, you know, be really cool for a lot of people to hear.
Mocha.
You guys can't see this, but she's, you know, licking herself. Well,
she's
you can.
She's
see her little
bathing.
leg.
She's bathing herself.
Yeah. And I just don't have the motivation to actually go out and do those things. But I got a story, as you can see.
Yeah.
Speaking all over the place.
But thank you so much.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure.
Heard. Boom.